I found myself staring at my phone at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, reading through old text messages between my mom and my sister. Messages I wasn't supposed to see. Messages that made my stomach feel like it had turned to concrete. The message thread had been forwarded to me by accident. My sister had meant to send it to Marcus, I think, some kind of apology for not believing him sooner. But it came to me instead, and there it was in plain text. My mother saying that she'd always found me to be overly emotional and dramatic, that she wasn't surprised I'd pushed Marcus away with my neediness, that she understood why he felt the need to tell people what I'd really done. My name is Sarah. I'm 31 years old, and I'm the kind of person who believes that if you're honest with people, they'll eventually be honest back. That belief has cost me more than I can measure. I believed it when I was 7 and told my teacher the truth about my dad's drinking, only to come home to a terrified mother who told me I should never speak about family business outside the home. I believed it when I was 16 and confessed to my best friend that I'd cheated on a test, and she spent the next month telling everyone. I believed it through 3 years with Marcus, even as the light in his eyes when he looked at me dimmed to nothing. The thing about leaving Marcus wasn't dramatic. We didn't have screaming matches or throw things. What we had was a slow, quiet suffocation. 3 years of waking up next to someone who'd stopped really looking at you. 3 years of feeling like you were slowly disappearing into the shape he'd carved out for you. By the end, I was so small I barely took up any space in our bed. The problems had started so small I almost didn't notice them. A comment about my laugh being too loud at dinner with his friends. A suggestion that I dressed differently on date nights. Questions about where I'd been, who I'd texted, why I needed to see my friends so often. Each one tiny, deniable something I could convince myself I was overreacting about. But they accumulated like snow on a winter roof, and one day I realized I couldn't recognize myself in the mirror. I'd stopped seeing Rebecca. She'd asked about me one too many times, and Marcus had made it seem unreasonable, like I was being disloyal to the relationship. I'd reduced my hours at work, telling myself it was temporary, that I was just being supportive while he dealt with stress at his job. I'd learned to make jokes smaller, keep my opinions quieter, take up less space in conversations. The worst part was how normal it all seemed. He wasn't cruel about it. He was never overtly mean. He'd just gently redirect, gently suggest, gently make me understand that the version of me he loved was a smaller, quieter version. And because he did it so gently, I couldn't quite admit to myself what was happening. I left on a Wednesday in March. I'd planned it for weeks, found an apartment online, signed a lease, told my best friend Rebecca first, though it felt strange to reach out to her again after so long. I remember standing in our kitchen the morning I decided to tell him, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold and thinking, this is going to hurt him, and I still have to do it. That was the thing about me back then. I was always more worried about his pain than my own. Always translating my own needs into how they might affect someone else. He took it surprisingly well, too well maybe. He nodded, said he understood, asked where I was going. There was something almost relieved in his face, though he tried to hide it. Looking back now, I understand why. He already had someone else. He just hadn't told me yet, but in that moment his easy acceptance almost broke me. I'd been bracing for a fight, and instead there was just this quiet agreement that yes, I should go. Yes, I was right to leave. Yes, it would be better for both of us. The apartment was small but mine. It had a window that looked out onto a street where people actually walked and talked to each other. For the first 2 weeks I just sat there some mornings, watching the neighborhood wake up, feeling something that might have been peace. I'd get a cup of tea and sit in the window seat before work, and for maybe 30 minutes I didn't think about Marcus or what he might be doing or who he might be with. That's where I met David. He was the super in my building, this tall guy in his 60s with grey hair and permanent dirt under his fingernails. He moved through the building with a kind of solid presence, not loud, not demanding attention, just there, steady. He fixed things with an unhurried patience that made me feel calm just watching him work. I remember the day my toilet started running constantly, such a stupid, small thing. I called the landlord's number taped inside the cabinet. David came up at 6 p.m. on a Friday. He arrived wearing work clothes that smelled like sawdust and pipe compound. He got down on his knees without any fanfare and started working on the toilet, his movements precise and practiced. I stood awkwardly in the doorway, trying to make conversation because that's what you do, but he didn't seem to need it. He just worked. He fixed it in maybe 10 minutes, gave me a little nod, and was heading toward the door when he paused. His hand was on the doorframe and he turned back. "You're in 3B, right? Just moved in. His voice was rough, like he didn't use it much. Yeah, about 3 weeks ago. You're quiet, that's good. Last tenant in that unit threw parties till 3 a.m. He seemed about to leave again, then added, This neighborhood's nice if you want it to be. Good people around here, you just have to notice them. He was already walking away. I called after him, thank you, but he just waved without turning around. That was it. That was the whole interaction. I didn't think about it much at the time. He seemed like the kind of man who existed in the quiet spaces between other people's lives. I filed him away as nice enough and didn't think about him again for a while. My job was at a non-profit that helped older adults age in place. I loved it in the way you love something that's purpose-driven but also exhausting. I was a case manager, which meant I spent my days listening to people's problems and trying to solve ones that often had no solution. My clients were in their 80s and 90s mostly, and they'd tell me things about their marriages, their regrets, their children who never visited. They seemed to need to tell someone, and I was trained to listen. The peace didn't last long. About a month after I left Marcus, my phone started blowing up with messages, not from Marcus, from people I knew, acquaintances mostly, people I'd met through him at work functions. They were asking me questions disguised as concern. Are you doing okay? Do you want to talk about what happened? I heard things got pretty bad at the end. I realized what was happening when my sister called me crying. Sarah, what did you do to him? She asked. Her voice was shaking. What are you talking about? Marcus is telling people you had a breakdown, that you accused him of cheating on you for no reason, that you became obsessed with his phone and, she stopped. Did you do those things? The accusations were so specific, so detailed, that for a moment I doubted my own memory. Had I? No, I hadn't. I'd never accused him of anything. I'd left because I was tired of being invisible in my own relationship. He's lying, I said quietly. But why would he? Because I left him, and he can't let anyone think he wasn't the good guy in the breakup. There was silence on the line. She believed me, I think, but the doubt was already planted. I could hear it in the way she breathed. For the next 6 months, it was like watching someone build a narrative of who I was out of complete fiction. Marcus told people I was unstable, that I'd made up stories about him being unfaithful, that I'd sabotaged his career by threatening to tell his colleagues lies about him. The accusations kept expanding, kept changing shape to fit whatever audience he was talking to. To our mutual friends, I was emotionally abusive. To people in his industry, I was professionally unhinged. To my family, I was ungrateful and cruel for leaving such a devoted partner. The worst part was how believable he made it sound. He'd craft these stories with just enough truth mixed in, the fact that I had suspected him of cheating, the fact that I had been emotional during the breakup, and then wrap it all in a narrative of hurt. He was the victim, I was the villain, and he told it so well that I started to believe it myself some days. I tried to correct people at first. I'd reach out, explain my side, provide evidence that the things he was saying weren't true. I'd send carefully worded messages to mutual friends, trying to gently suggest their version of events was incomplete. But correcting lies is like trying to catch water with your bare hands. By the time you explain one thing, he's already told 3 new stories. And people want to believe the narrative that doesn't make them uncomfortable. Believing I was the villain made sense to them. It meant they didn't have to think about how quietly people can disappear in relationships. It meant they didn't have to examine their own relationships and wonder if they were doing the same thing. What killed me wasn't that people believed him. It was that my own family seemed to. My sister kept her distance. My mom stopped calling. I'd reach out to her, actual calls, not texts, trying to explain, and she'd listen with this tight, controlled patience that made it clear she didn't believe me. The silence from them was somehow worse than the active hostility from his friends. At least his friends' betrayal made sense. But my mother, who'd known me my whole life, seemed to think I was capable of being the person he was describing. That hurt in a way I couldn't articulate. I stopped going out. My apartment, which had felt like freedom, started to feel like a cage. I'd go to work, come home, sit in that window seat, and try not to think about the fact that I was being slowly erased from my own life. I was being rewritten as the villain in a story where I was just the person who'd wanted to leave. It was during this time that I did something I'm not proud of. I started researching Marcus, not normal checking in on someone's stuff. I mean, I was going through his Instagram, looking for comments, searching for hints that he was unhappy too, that maybe what he was doing, the character assassination, the lies, was coming from a place of pain. I wanted to find something that would make sense of it. I wanted to understand how someone could systematically destroy someone else's reputation so carefully, so thoroughly, and still sleep at night. One night, drunk on wine and rage that I couldn't express to anyone because who would listen to the girl everyone had already decided was the problem, I created a fake Instagram account. Just to see, just to look at his posts without him knowing. I was in deep, scrolling through months of photos when I saw it. A photo from a weekend trip to the beach. Marcus was there looking happy, tanned, his arm around a girl I didn't recognize. The caption, "Finally found someone who gets me." The photo was dated from 2 weeks before he and I had officially separated. I want to tell you that I felt vindication in that moment, that I felt proven right, but what I actually felt was a kind of sick numbness, because it didn't matter. Even with proof that he'd cheated, that he'd been with someone else while telling me I was crazy for suspecting infidelity, it didn't change anything. It didn't make the lies stop. It didn't bring my family back. It didn't make people believe me. So I did the thing I'd been thinking about for months. I downloaded all the evidence I could find. The photos, the timestamps, the texts I'd managed to screenshot. I put together a document, clear and factual and unemotional, that showed exactly what Marcus had been doing while telling people I was unstable for suspecting he was cheating. I sent it to everyone, his co-workers, my family, mutual friends. I sent it with a message that said, "I'm not writing this for sympathy. I'm writing this because I'm tired of being lied about. Here's the truth." For about 12 hours, I felt something like relief. Then the guilt started, and it didn't stop. Because yes, Marcus deserved to have his lies exposed. But I'd done it in anger, publicly, without talking to him first. I'd become the person he'd been telling everyone I was, reactive, unhinged, willing to burn things down just to prove a point. The responses came in slowly. Some people apologized for believing him. Some people said I'd handled it perfectly, that he deserved it. But a lot of people just went quiet, because the truth doesn't actually matter as much as how you tell it, and I'd told it like a weapon. 3 weeks after I sent that message, I was sitting in my apartment and I couldn't stop shaking. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. I'd lie awake at night thinking about the people who'd reached out and the ones who hadn't. I'd refreshed my emails compulsively, waiting for some response from my family that never came. My mom had read the message, I could see the read receipt, but she didn't write back. The breakdown wasn't sudden. It was more like a slow leak in a dam. I just stopped functioning one day. I called in sick to work and didn't go back. I'd sit in my window seat for hours without thinking about anything in particular, just staring at the street below. I didn't shower for a week. I didn't answer calls. I existed in a state of absolute flatness, where nothing mattered and everything was too much at the same time. It was David who found me. I hadn't paid my rent. I don't know how long I'd missed the deadline, maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3. I'd lost track of time in the way you do when you stop caring about things like months and days. There was a knock on my door that I ignored. Maury knocks, then a key in the lock. He had a master key, and David was standing in my apartment, looking at me sitting in my window seat in the same clothes I'd been wearing for days. He didn't say anything at first. He just walked around, opening windows, letting light in. Then he went to my kitchen and started running water, washing the dishes that had piled up. He worked in silence for about an hour while I watched him, too tired to even feel embarrassed. When he was done, he sat down in the chair across from me. "I'm calling your landlord and telling him you've got a medical situation," he said. "You're getting an extension on rent, no questions asked. My treat if needed." I started crying then, not because of what he'd done but because of how he'd done it. No judgment, no questions, no drama, he just helped. "Why?" I asked him. He looked out the window for a long time before answering. "I had a daughter once. She was about your age. She left a guy who wasn't good for her, and instead of everyone celebrating that she'd gotten out, they turned on her, made her feel crazy. He stopped. She didn't get to see that it wasn't her fault, that she wasn't the villain in her own story." "What happened to her?" I asked. "She couldn't live with the weight of what everyone told her she was, so one day she didn't wake up." The silence after that was so heavy it felt like it had weight. "I won't let that happen again if I can help it," he said. "Not on my watch." After that day, something shifted inside me. It wasn't a magical healing. It was slower than that. David would bring groceries and leave them in my kitchen. He'd text me simple things. "Ate lunch. Saw a movie today, wasn't terrible." Not because he needed responses, but because he wanted me to know that I existed, that someone saw me. My therapist, I'd finally called and made an appointment, told me that what I was experiencing was complicated grief. Grief over the relationship, grief over my reputation, grief over the loss of my family's trust. And underneath all of it was grief over who I'd become in my anger. That hurt the most. I started going to work again. It was hard walking through those doors knowing that people knew what I'd done. But my boss, who I'd worried would fire me, just said, "Welcome back, your clients missed you." And somehow that small grace was enough to keep going. 4 months into my recovery, my mom called. "I read the messages again," she said without any preamble. "The ones you sent, I was angry at you and I didn't want to see what you were saying, but I read them, I believe you now." I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt tired. "I also did some research," she continued, "about Marcus, about the pattern of what he was doing. It's called a smear campaign. It's a form of abuse whether people realize it or not." "I know," I said quietly. "I'm sorry, honey, I'm sorry I wasn't there." We talked for a long time after that. Not about reconciliation, that's not how these things work, but about understanding, about her acknowledging that I hadn't been crazy, that I'd been hurt and then hurt again by the people who should have believed me. But the thing I realized, talking to her, was that I'd been waiting for her to make this call. I'd been waiting for everyone to finally see that I was right all along. And when they did, it didn't fix anything. It didn't bring back the months I'd lost to depression. It didn't erase the fact that I'd sent that public message in anger. It didn't give me back the version of myself that I'd been before all of this. What fixed things was smaller and quieter. It was going to the park by myself and reading a book without listening for my phone. It was having dinner with a friend from work and laughing at something that had nothing to do with Marcus or reputation or being believed. It was the day David mentioned, in passing, that his daughter's foundation helped young women who'd experienced relationship trauma, and I volunteered to help. It was realizing that I could build something new from the ashes of who I'd been. 6 months after David found me in my apartment, I ran into Marcus at a grocery store. I was in the produce section, picking out avocados, and he was there in the cereal aisle. He saw me before I saw him and he looked away quickly. But I saw his face for that moment, and what struck me wasn't anger or vindication. It was just sadness. He looked like someone who'd built his entire identity around being wronged, and now that he wasn't the victim anymore, he didn't know who he was. I didn't approach him. I didn't need to. I just paid for my groceries and left. On my walk home, I got a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, I realized it was from someone Marcus had told the lies to, a woman named Jennifer who'd worked with him. "I'm sorry," the text said. "I just found out that what Marcus told me about you wasn't true. I should have asked more questions instead of just believing him. I'm genuinely sorry for whatever small part I played in hurting you." I stared at that message for a long time. And then I realized something that changed how I understood the entire last year of my life. I'd been so focused on being vindicated, on proving that I was right and Marcus was wrong, that I'd missed something important. I'd missed the people who were sorry. I'd missed the ones who'd eventually come around. I'd been waiting for proof of my innocence instead of noticing the people who believed in my humanity. David had known this all along. That's why he'd helped me without making me earn it. That's why he'd told me about his daughter. He knew that sometimes being right doesn't matter. What matters is finding the people who see you anyway. A week after that text from Jennifer, I got a call from a lawyer. Marcus was being investigated for professional misconduct. Apparently, the pattern of how he'd treated me, the way he'd weaponized lies, isolated me from my support system, made me question my own reality, was exactly the same pattern he'd used with other women at his company. I found out that Marcus wasn't really losing his perfect image because of what I'd done. He was losing it because of who he was. What I'd sent out into the world had just been the domino. The structure was already falling. This should have felt like vindication, and maybe it did a little bit, but mostly it felt like closure, like finally understanding that his actions had nothing to do with me and everything to do with him, that none of the lies he told about me were ever actually about who I was. They were about who he needed everyone to think I was, so that he didn't have to be honest about who he really was. When David asked me out for coffee a week later, I almost said no. I was worried about the age gap, the imbalance of him having helped me so much. But he smiled at me in that patient way he had, and he said, I'm asking you to have coffee with me, not to thank me, not to heal, just to sit with another person. Think you could do that?" So I did. We talked about his daughter. He told me about her more that day than he had before, about how smart she was, how kind, how she'd made the mistake of believing she was too broken for anyone to love. He told me about how he'd carried the guilt of not being able to save her, how he'd almost let that guilt turn him into someone bitter. But then he'd decided that instead of being angry about what he couldn't change, he'd try to help people like her, like me. "I should tell you something," I said to him. "You helped me a lot and I'm grateful, but I'm going to build a life now, a real one, with my own friends and my own things. I won't be someone's project. I hope you can understand that." He nodded like he'd been waiting for me to say this. "I wouldn't have it any other way," he said. And he meant it. 3 years later, I'm sitting in the office of David's Daughters Foundation, where I work full-time now. I help women process their experiences with emotional abuse and smear campaigns. I've seen so many variations of my own story played out in other people's lives, and what I've learned is that there's no neat ending. There's no moment where the bad guy gets what he deserves and the good guy gets the girl and everything slots into place. What there is slow rebuilding. There's the choice to not let someone else's lies become your truth. There's the decision to extend grace to yourself when you've made mistakes, like I did when I sent that message in anger. There's finding the small moments of genuine human connection that remind you that you're still here, still real, still worth knowing. Marcus got married last year. I found out through a mutual acquaintance. Part of me wondered if his new partner would eventually see what I'd seen, the way he could reshape reality to fit his narrative, the way he could make you feel crazy for doubting him. But that's not my story to tell anymore. What I know now is that I waited for him to be exposed, and when he was, it didn't change a single thing about me or my life. What changed my life was David sitting in my apartment, silently washing my dishes. It was my mom finally reading my message. It was Jennifer texting an apology she didn't owe me. It was me eventually choosing to believe that I was worth saving. The revenge I thought I wanted wasn't in exposure or vindication. It was in becoming someone who didn't need either one. I ran into Marcus again last month, different grocery store this time. We didn't make eye contact and that was fine. He'd become a stranger to me in the best possible way. What mattered was that I was the same person I'd always been underneath all the lies. It just took almost losing myself completely to finally believe it. David still texts me the same way he always does. Simple, steady, undemanding. Read a good book. Made soup. Thinking of you. He never asked me to love him and maybe that's why I eventually did. Not romantically, I'm not sure my heart works that way anymore, but deeply, the way you love someone who sees you at your worst and chooses to stay. Last week I was helping one of my clients process a breakup where her ex was telling lies about her. She asked me, "When does it stop? When do I get to stop hurting?" I thought about the years I'd waited for that, how I'd thought it would come the moment everyone finally knew the truth, how I'd been so wrong. "It stops," I told her, "when you stop waiting for permission from other people to decide who you are. It stops when you decide that their lies say nothing about you and everything about them. It stops when you realize that the people who matter will believe you without proof." She cried then and I held her hand, because I knew exactly how it felt to finally understand that you'd been holding your own power the entire time. Sometimes healing isn't about being vindicated. Sometimes it's just about learning to live with the knowledge that not everyone will understand, and that's okay. The ones who do, the ones who show up anyway, those are the people who matter. That's what I wish someone had told me 3 years ago, that David, in his quiet, patient way, was already showing me all along.